Well, hello again, folks. It's World War II TV. I'm Paul Woodadge, and we're off to the Eastern Front today to talk about the events that occurred east of Warsaw in July, August 1944. And joining me today from the USA via internet is Douglas Nash. Good evening, Douglas, or afternoon. How are you doing? Hang on, I muted you. Hang on.
Oh,
sorry. Hello,
yes.
Douglas. How are you doing?
Good. Good afternoon. Good evening for those of you who are over there in Europe.
So, before we get into the specifics of the battle, you're obviously ex-services. How did you get from your interest in serving with the U.S. Army to being interested in the German side of things in World War II, and what led you to study the units that you did?
Yeah, as an officer. Whoops. I'm sorry.
That was my fault.
Yeah, that's all right. As an officer, I had an opportunity to choose an additional specialty. And I choose military historian because ever since I was a little kid, I've always been interested in military history. And I got an opportunity to pursue a master's degree in military history at the Command and General Staff College. And as a staff officer for a long time, probably about 10 years in all, I developed a keen interest in the operations of other armies and what kind of work and preparation had to go into planning and conducting and concluding large-scale operations. And but when you want to study that particular topic, one of the best places to study large-scale, combat operations is the Eastern Front in World War II, where you had not corps, not armies, but army groups and groups of army groups carrying out operations on a very vast scale, requiring a huge amount of complex work that went on behind the scenes to plan and support these type of operations. What got me interested in writing this particular book, actually, I trace it back to when I wrote the book Kampfgruppe Mellencamp with RZM Publishing, along with Remy Spezzano, who's the publisher. And the Kampfgruppe Mellencamp ended with the role of the SS Viking Division and fighting that was taking place east of Warsaw, about 120 kilometers east of Warsaw. And I noticed at the time that the Viking Division came under the operational control of the 4th SS-Panzerkorps on or about 28 July. But when I was doing further research, nobody had written anything at all in an official history about that particular SS Panzer Corps. There's plenty of books about the 1st SS Panzer Corps, the 2nd, and the 3rd, but there was nothing at all written on any formal manuscripts or books about that particular corps. So it piqued my interest, and so I started to do a little digger deeping, and I found enough. I thought I could translate into a single volume work. As it turned out, it expanded into 3 volumes on the history of the Corps.
Well, and the point is, we don't do enough examination of World War II from the point of view of the Germans. I don't think we focus too much on what the Allies are doing because, as they always say, the history is written by the victors, and it's always interesting to study things from the other point of view and get what their plans are. So let's start at the beginning for those who are joining in. We're talking about the events of July and August 44, and we're talking about the Polish. So we'll start with a map of the Eastern Front as it was 10th to 22nd July 1944. So Douglas, just kind of run through what was going on at this part of the war. Obviously, the Russians have moved from the kind of defensive part, defending their country and their homeland, to the offensive part now. So what's been happening in sort of late spring, early summer of 1944?
Right. The biggest event of the summer was the large-scale Soviet counteroffensive that they called Operation Bagration, which was initiated on the 22nd of June, 1944, and the goal was nothing less than the annihilation of Army Group Center. Once this took about 3 weeks before Army Group Center was disposed of, and so what I write about it is the phase that began immediately after Bagration had more or less ran the course of the first phase, and my study actually begins with the beginning of the second phase of the summer offensive, which was aimed at destroying all of Army Group Center and Army Group North, the remnants of Army Group Center, and was intended to go behind through past Warsaw all the way up to the Bay of Danzig, which would have cut off everything to the east of that and would essentially have brought the war in the east to an early end. It didn't quite work out that way, and one of the reasons why is that Field Marshal Model, who took command of Army Group Center in the early July, he was able to marshal enough forces quickly enough that he was able to thwart the plans of the First Belarusian Front and restore some semblance of stability to the Eastern Front.
Yeah, and it's key to talk to remind people watching that this is part of 3 shows this week about this area of the war. We've got Douglas talking about the German SS Corps, and then we've got Alexander Ritchie joining us tomorrow talking about kind of the Red Army and what they're up to, and then we've got Alina joining us on Friday talking about what was happening in Warsaw itself. And you made the good point there, Douglas, about the fact that the Russian advance was not to do with capturing cities, it was to do with annihilating army group. This is about 2 armies trying to annihilate each other, not actually liberate or capture cities. The arena of the battle is where the armies are, not the city. Am I correct in saying that?
Yes, that's correct. I could find no evidence that the Red Army had planned to take Warsaw. They assumed, it appears, looking at the official records, that they assumed Warsaw would fall into their hands like a ripe apple, in that their operational goal was actually extended far beyond Warsaw. And so for that reason, they didn't put a lot of attention into liberating the city. Rather, their intention was to annihilate Army Group Center and Army Group North and end the war.
Yeah, exactly. So it's all about beating and besting the enemy. So I'm going to share the second map now, because I think it's pertinent to bring that in now. And the second map is a little bit more close to what we're talking about. And we're talking about, so for those watching, folks, you can see the center of the front. There's Warsaw there, so the middle left of the map there. I put a little red dot in it. And then everything around this is what we're talking about today with the German units and the Russian units there. So I'm going to hand over to you to kind of explain things as we go now. But these 2 maps, I'm showing these first, folks, because they're portrait shaped, and I've got other maps in my PowerPoint, or rather Douglas's PowerPoint presentation, to show you later on. But I want to get people an idea of what we're talking about. Essentially, we're talking about the area east of Warsaw. So that's the focus. We will be mentioning Warsaw, but the actual events inside the city we'll be covering on other shows. This is all about as Douglas said there, the battle for the army groups engaging each other. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Douglas for the PowerPoint presentation. So I'm going to get that ready now, and then we can start, and Douglas can explain it, because I have to confess, folks, I am not a big student of this front. It's all kind of a new learning curve for me. I'm doing my very best, but I'm not the best at this front at all. So there we are. Do we want to talk about the Soviet advance first, or do you want to talk about some of the leaders? Which way do you want to go, Douglas?
Well, I guess I need to set the scene. Can you go back to the previous map briefly?
I can do. Yep. Just bear with me. Yep. I got rid of it, and then I'll get it again. No worries. Where's it gone? It's gone again. Hang on.
Yeah, gotta love this technology.
Yeah, it's just gone for some reason. Hang on, but just start talking. I'll find it for you. Hang on.
Well, anyway. On 18 July, Marshal Rokossovsky, who commanded the First Belarusian Front, he initiated his offensive. And that offensive was designed to split the German Second Army from the Fourth Army, and to come around on the left flank with a tank army that was aimed towards the Vistula River. The Soviet focus during this particular phase was getting to the Vistula as quickly as possible and seizing bridges in order to continue the operation, maintain the operations tempo of the summer offensive, so that, again, they could end the war as quickly as possible. Now, there you are. In this particular map, what Model was focused on between 18 and 26 July was stabilizing the Second Army's front. Now, the Second Army had nearly collapsed in the early fighting during the second week of July, and the Viking division, the 5th SS-Panzer Division, rather, was brought in along with the Army 4th Panzer Division to stabilize that front. However, while they had succeeded by the 26th of July in stabilizing the front, that went roughly from the city of Siedlce, which you see there at the bend down there in the center of the picture, Siedlce, all the way up to Bialystok. They had more or less stabilized that. However, on the left, if you see the 8th Guards Army and the 2nd Tank Army, they made a dash, blew through the northern flank of the 4th Panzer Army in the south, and they reached the Vistula at first at Puławy and then later at Magnuszów. And this is where Rokossovsky made the biggest gamble of his career. What he did, instead of attempting to push everything across the Vistula there at Magnuszów and Puławy, he decided instead, look, there's no German forces here to stop me. I'm going to go for a complete coup de grace here and seize the bridges across the Narew River north of Warsaw between the town of Zagierza, Serok, and Modlin, which there were 3 bridges, and of course there were bridges across the Vistula on the eastern right there at Warsaw and Praga. There were like 4 major bridges there and 3 more bridges to the north. But here he confounded the Germans. Instead of going for Praga with the 2nd Tank Army, he completely bypassed Praga on about 1 August. And that's a key date that we'll come back to. And so that the 3rd Tank Corps, which was the spearhead, blew past Praga, leaving the other 2 tank corps behind, sort of to cover its flanks. And it made a lunge towards Zagierza and the bridge at Serok. So that was kind of where the events kicked off on 1 August. But as you'll see here, the Germans were frantically trying to reconstruct a cohesive front line, something they had not had since the 22nd of June. And this was at the point where Field Marshal Model sprung the trap he had been laying for the past several days, because he saw this advance by the 2nd Tank Army. He instinctively realized what Rokossovsky was intending to do with that tank army, and he quickly devised a plan that would concentrate 5 panzer divisions in time and space in order to meet at a certain point where they could cut off and annihilate the bulk of the 2nd Tank Army. And so this is kind of where the scene is right at about 1 August.
Yeah, and when we were talking in our pre-show chats and tests, this is, for folks watching, this is one of the largest tank battles in World War II, and a lot of people just aren't aware of it because there are other events happening elsewhere. In August 44, you've got the Falaise Gap closing in Normandy, you've got the Warsaw uprising going on, there's other things happening elsewhere, and this amazing clash of arms between 2 very able and capable commanders using very, in some cases, capable divisions is all happening, and people just don't know enough about it. And I'm particularly fascinated by it because it really is pretty cool. So let's talk a bit, before we get into the nature of the battle, about the corps you write about the 4th SS Corps and how they've been put together, because it was reasonably swift from their conception to their joining the battle.
Yes. Okay. So the 4th SS-Panzerkorps was the 4th of the 4 SS-Panzerkorps raised during World War II. It was initially activated in August 1943, but the activation was postponed in December because all of its personnel, pretty much everyone who they assembled for that, was used to form the 3rd Germanic SS-Panzerkorps under General Steiner, who was famous for the Battle of Berlin, who never did ride to Hitler's rescue. At any rate, so the reactivation of the Corps began again in April of 1944. And it was originally intended to go to the Western Front in order to control a couple of SS divisions that were forming up there, intended to repel the upcoming Allied landings in Normandy. But instead, because of the Eastern Front collapsed completely during the summer of 1944, that Corps headquarters was rushed to the Eastern Front, and it was charged with assuming command and control over the 3rd SS-Panzer Division Totenkopf, a very famous division, as well as the 5th SS-Panzer Division Viking, also equally famous for its exploits on the Eastern Front. Now, what you see here, you see on the left, Field Marshal Model, when he met Gille for the General Gille in the center, the fellow with the Knight's Cross there in the center. He had assumed command of the 4th SS-Panzerkorps officially on the 28th of July, 1944. And this scene depicts the visit by Field Marshal Model to General Gille's headquarters in the town of Rogov, which is where the Corps headquarters was situated at that particular time. And this is not a PR photo, rather it was a very brief and intense meeting that lasted only about an hour, but this is where Model briefs Gille on what exactly he wants his Corps to do for this upcoming counterattack.
Yeah, and we were talking earlier before you went live about modal. People understand watching this. That same field marshal that was involved in the Battle of Arnhem and portrayed by Maximilian Schell in no, not Maximilian, the other actor in Bridge Too Far, and he's kind of seen a bit desk bound, not very dynamic in that film. But earlier, a month or two earlier, what he's doing here, as you will explain during the show, is very bold, very dynamic. His Russian counterpart is also very bold, very dynamic, and these two strategists are meeting in this environment and are trying to best each other, and it's just I can't wait to get started with the details of the battle, because it really is quite an epic one. And I'll hand over to you to keep on talking. So I'll just move back and forward through the photos as you need them. But Douglas has provided folks quite a lot of nice photos for this, so it just bears with me to kind of show the right one at the right time. We've got a couple more maps to show you, but I'll let you carry on about the meeting and what Modal's plan was, and talk more about the units involved and what their objectives were.
Sure. And up to this point, Modal had been known as the Führer's fireman. That is Hitler's, fireman who could be relied upon in a crisis situation to shore up a crumbling front. And the situation here on the Eastern Front in the summer of 1944 was no exception. One of his hallmarks was his ability to quickly see a situation, size up what he needs to do, and acting in a very rapid manner. Now, generally, he's not known as a great strategist or a great operational commander like Rommel or perhaps Guderian, but in this particular battle, he displayed some flashes of brilliance, sort of reveal that he's been somewhat underrated as a commander. But some of the things he did in this battle, such as of the 4th Panzer Division commander's attack column, is something that I found no other record of any other field marshal having led an attack in this manner. So it reveals that he was quite an interesting individual and farsighted in the way he viewed the battle. The Germans have a word for it. It's called Fingerspitzengefühl, and it's an instinctive way of seeing and understanding and developing a course of action that's suited at that moment in time. And in this particular case, he displayed that tendency rather well.
So what essentially, and we'll go into the detail later on, essentially what was the plan? That you said the Russians are advancing, the Red Army is advancing, they're looking at these bridges. What is the basic concept of Modal's plan? What's he trying to do?
Yeah, so anyway, realize if the 2nd Tank Army reached the bridges over the Nara River and reached the bridges at Praga at the same time, they could have very easily have cut off the 2nd Army, the 9th Army, and the 4th Army from their supply lines, because they were dependent on these bridges for the bulk of their fuel, ammunition, and food, as well as evacuation of wounded. So he knew what the stakes were. The stakes were extremely high, which led him to take some very great risk. And what these risks entailed was removing 4 or 5 Panzer divisions from other places of the Army Group Center front where they were all decisively engaged in repelling Soviet attacks, and assembled them within a 3-day period so that they would conduct a concentric attack that was aimed at nothing less than cutting off and wiping out the 2nd Tank Army. And they were able to do this in a very rapid period. The Viking Division was detached and marched 80 kilometers. The 19th Panzer Division had just come back from Holland, where it had been completely rebuilt. It was launched into the attack to seize and protect the bridges over the Narev River, and then they counterattacked over those bridges. The Hermann Göring Division, which was a Panzer Division by this point, was brought up from the southwest, from the Magnushev bridgehead, and the 4th Panzer Division was also taken from a position it had been holding north of the Viking Division in an attack from the northeast. The Totenkopf, the 5th Panzer Division in the mix, did not participate directly in the battle, but it held the flank and warded off all the Soviet relief attempts as they tried to fight through and relieve and rescue the 8th Tank Corps from the 2nd Tank Army. So that was the initial plan, and it was a trap that had been sprung on 1 August when the 3rd Tank Corps came within 3 kilometers of the Narev River. And here, I'm sorry.
Let me just show map number 3, so we can start with the map. Is that a good place to start now?
Yeah, that's good. Okay, so what this shows, the red arrows are the Soviet movement. It depicts in the bottom of the picture the movement of the 8th Guards Army, which was a general-purpose infantry army commanded by General Chuikov, the hero of Stalingrad. And then you have the other, the second tank army that was marching to the north. You can see it paralleling the Vistula River east of Warsaw, and you can see where the arrow, the furthest arrow there, is the 3rd Tank Corps as it drives quickly towards the bridges on the Narev River. And the 2nd Tank Army is commanded by General Alexiev. He was the chief of staff because the previous tank army commander had been wounded during the fighting for the city of Lublin. So this shows the scene, the Soviet concept of maneuver, where you can see where they're trying to get up in behind the 9th Army, the 2nd Army. The 9th Army, by this point, there was only a couple of divisions, 1 Panzer Corps, the 39th Panzer Corps. And you can see if they had succeeded in this, it would have spelled pretty much the end of the line for the bulk of Army Group Center, which would have resulted in this, for the second time in less than 2 months, of Army Group Center being wiped out.
Yeah, exactly. So we'll go back to some of those command photos. So, I mean, if you want to explain what we're looking at in some of these photos here, we've got some much more exciting combat photos as well coming up later. And we've got even some footage from the time as well, which we're going to share at some point. So who are the main players beyond Modal? Who are the main players? Well, we'll run through the photos and explain who some of these people are.
Sure. Okay, what you see here is a command conference between General Gille on the left, who's the commander of the 4th SS-Panzerkorps, and to his immediate left in the center is General Dietrich von Salken, who is the commander of the 39th Panzer Corps. And on the right is Gille's chief of staff, Manfred Schoenfelder. But anyway, the two generals were conferring because they had to coordinate their activity. They had to deconflict attack avenues of attack that they were going to use with their panzer divisions. Von Salken controlled the 19th Panzer Division and the Hermann Goering Division, while Gille controlled the 3rd and 5th SS Panzer Divisions, and later on the 4th Panzer Division when it joined the battle a couple days later. So this took place about the 31st of July, this particular photo, which was taken by Gille's aide-de-camp, Gunther Lange, who's still alive and who provided me a number of these photos that you see.
Wow. I just interesting how quickly this battle was put together, because, you know, we're talking about, I'm going off on tangent now, I do that a lot, but, you know, we students in military history talk about how hastily the Operation Market Garden plan was put together, but this was put together in a matter of days, if not almost hours. So there's nothing that if you've got the right people, a plan can be put together very, very quickly if you've got the foresight, really.
Yeah, exactly. And again, Modal, you know, he developed the concept in his own mind probably on the evening of the 27th of July. He issued the orders late that night. They went out early the morning on the 28th of July, and that resulted in a massive shuffling operation where you had to have these panzer divisions hand over their sector to an infantry division and move out as quickly as they could to get in position in time to carry out these attacks. And again, like I said, it happened in less than 3 days, and they were in position ready to begin their counterattack. And again, this is a picture of General Gille left and right, and the young man in the center is Gunther Lange, at the time a second lieutenant and the aide-de-camp to General Gille. And again, he provided me an enormous amount of assistance in putting this together.
Wow. And then we better talk about the other side for a second. This very decorated gentleman is kind of on the other side there. So explain who this is.
Yeah, that's Marshal Rokossovsky, the commander of the 1st Belarusian Front. And he was of Polish extraction and one of Stalin's most ablest generals. And he was chosen for this mission because he was capable of carrying it out, because the right wing of his army group participated in Operation Bagration. So the right wing had been in action more or less continuously since the last week of June. The left wing of his army, which was 6 other armies, including a Polish army and a tank army, the left wing did not actually begin conducting offensive operations until the 18th of July. So that grouping, or that left wing of the 1st Belarusian Front, was relatively fresh. So it's not like they were in combat since the 22nd of June. This left wing of his army, they were fresh, they were fully equipped, they were full strength, and they initiated a very powerful offensive on the 18th of July. And it was against this man, very talented man, also known as sort of a daredevil, and how he employed his forces. and taking risks that other Soviet marshals wouldn't have taken. He was placed in command of carrying out this operation.
Well, so, you know, you've got these two incredibly powerful people with forces at their disposal. It's all intriguing stuff. So, and we are so grateful we've got these wonderful photos that show some of this planning. And yeah, I don't see too much stress on those photos, on those faces at that point there. You know, it's interesting. You know, they've got a massive, great battle coming up, and they look like they're, you know, on a summer vacation almost.
Yeah, well, this battle of this photo here was probably taken the first week of August, most likely shortly after the battle concluded. But on the left, again, you see General Gille, the Corps commander, and to his immediate left, and in the center is the commander of the Totenkopf division, SS General Becker. And he'd been in command of the division for a little over the year. And the other officers are staff officers, his operations officer, his supply officer. And on the far right, carrying a very large map case, is young Gunther Lange, who is Gille's aide-de-camp. And these photos came out of his personal photo collection. But, you know, I'll get into the Totenkopf a little bit later. Now, this next photo that you showed was the commander of the 9th Army, General Nikolaus von Foreman. On the left, that's a portrait. On the right, that's what he actually looked like in real life before he got his Knight's Cross. But he commanded the 9th Army. Now, the 9th Army had been destroyed during Operation Bagration. It was on the right flank, or the southernmost flank of Army Group Center, and Operation Bagration nearly annihilated the 9th Army. So his charge was to put an army back together again using bits and pieces and new units brought in from Germany, and he was able to very quickly get these forces together and control the 39th Panzerkorps during the operation. So while Gille commanded the operation to the east with the 4th Panzer Corps, it was the 39th Panzer Corps that was under 9th Army's control that fought on the western side of the salient. So you had these two Panzer Corps, each one commanded by two different armies, the 39th, 9th Army, the 4th SS-Panzer Corps under the 2nd Army, and their task was to come together and to pinch off as much of the 2nd Tank Army as they could. And
it's an ambitious plan, isn't it? I mean, it's got a lot of moving parts to it that have to work for it to work. And it's I don't want to say give credit to the German commanders, but it is interesting and testament to their skills that they do so well and manage to pull something so remarkable together. And we just had a question, Tim Sampson, one of our regular viewers, just when we go back to the Soviet force, he said, when you say the Soviets were full strength, what was the level of training or experience of the replacements that helped get them to being full strength? Is there anything we can comment about what kind of experience the Soviet units have?
Yeah, the units that had been earmarked for Operation Bagration had several months in order to absorb replacements, be issued new equipment, or replace worn out equipment. So they'd had a couple of months, because if you look at the Eastern Front, it had settled down more or less by the end of April, and with the exception of the Crimea, which is a whole different little battle in itself, most of the Eastern Front between Finland and the Romanian border had settled down and was relatively quiet until the front exploded on the 22nd of June. So the first Belarusian front, the first Ukrainian front, and the other armies and army groups that had took part in Operation Bagration, they'd had a couple of months in order to reorganize, rearm, re-equip, reconstitute, and so forth. So they are at relatively full strength. Now, that's a qualified term because some units are more equal than others. For example, Guards units, Guards tank, Guards rifle divisions, they were brought up to full strength and then some, whereas some of the run-of-the-mill rifle divisions were at maybe 80%, according to Soviet figures, thanks to David Glantz. So in terms of strength of the Soviet units in previous years, these armies were enormously strong. And for the operation that I'm discussing here, the operation that began on 18 July, which is just the left wing, only the left wing of the First Belarusian Front, Rokossovsky had 410,000 men at his disposal and over 1,800 tanks of all kinds and self-propelled guns that were contained in these armies, these 6 armies on the left wing of his army group.
Yeah, I mean, and that when you were telling me in advance about just how enormous this battle was, and I felt a bit, embarrassed. I didn't know a bit more about it. Frank, I knew a bit about it, but not very much. And I mean, as you said about a piece you wrote for an article a few years ago, by the largest, if not the largest tank battle. Forget Kursk. I mean, certainly in this year, this is big. This is a full scale armored engagement, and it's fantastic that you bring it to us. So let's talk about some. We were going to mention the some of the other units within the Corps. So these photos here, we've got a series of photos. Explain who these guys are and what their role was.
It was about a 50-50 split between number of SS troops and regular German army troops. And what you see here are troops from the 19th Panzer Division fighting east of Warsaw. Many of the pictures are misidentified. They depicts them as taking part in the fighting the Warsaw uprising. This is not correct. The 19th Panzer Division fought on the other bank of the Vistula, and these are some of the young men who are engaged in the battle. And as you look at the pictures that follow, you'll see a lot of these guys appear pretty young. And the 19th Panzer Division had just completed being completely reconstituted in Holland, so it was nearly full strength. It had experienced leaders. It was well trained. And it was the perfect unit at that time to throw into the battle along the northwestern corner of the salient that was formed by the 3rd Tank Corps. And so that's the 19th Panzer Division. Now, what I'm going to show here, or what you're going to click through here, is depicts the fighting by the Totenkopf Division for the key city of Siedlce, which was on the far east. It was about 80 kilometers east of Warsaw. Now that was important. They had to hold this linchpin because it is a key highway and rail hub on the far eastern salient of Army Group Center. They had to hold this until the other panzer divisions got into position. And not only did they have to hold this key city, which was subjected to numerous counterattacks by the 11th Tank Corps and the 2nd Guards Cavalry Corps, the division was also tasked with extending its front as far to the west as possible in order to allow the Viking division to concentrate and focus its effort against cutting off the tank army, the 2nd Tank Army at the base. Now, what developed over the next several days from about 28 July till about 31st of July was some of the most savage fighting ever seen on the Eastern Front, where you saw the Totenkopf Division taking on two and portions of another 3rd Soviet Corps, and was able to hold the line long enough for the other divisions to get in position. But the photos that you see here were taken by a German combat photographer that shows the savagery, the bitterness, and all the the smoke and death and confusion that was reigning around the battlefield within the town of Siedlce itself and on the outskirts. Now, the Totenkopf Division had developed a reputation not only for brutality, of course, but also as one of the most toughest, reliable, motivated divisions of any within the German armed forces. Over the past several years of constant combat, it had developed a very highly skilled, highly talented officer corps and a very motivated, and some would even say fanatic, body of troops who would literally fight to the death if they were ordered to do so. And so you had this one division take on a Soviet force probably 5 or 6 times its size, and was able to hold the line for 4 crucial days until everyone was ready. So while it did not directly participate in the Battle of Praga, which started on the 1st of August, without its sacrifice and its defensive effort in Siedlce, the German counterattack could have never taken place.
Yeah, I mean, and they are just amazing photos. I mean, there's something you can see that it's no holds barred. It's the smoke, the ferocity. These look like they're highly, as you said, they're highly motivated, highly efficient troops. I'm used to studying photos of Normandy where by July and August there are some good units here, but there's lots of completely worn down units that have got not much fight left in them. And this is very different. This is an army that looks like it's absolutely going for this hell for leather, and they're just an amazing set of photos. And of course, folks, don't forget all these photos we're showing you, or rather all these stories they're all in Douglas's amazing book, and we'll mention that repeatedly. But so do you want to show the footage now? Is that a good time to show the footage?
Yeah, and if you don't mind, I'll just throw in a few comments here and there.
Yeah, so this is, well, I'll let Douglas comment. This is a bit of German archive footage. It's just silent.
Yeah, this is from the Deutsche Wochenschau, which was a weekly propaganda newsreel that was filmed by combat photographers and shown back home for the troops and for the German civilian population. And this particular 2-minute sequence shows the arrival of the Totenkopf division and the Viking division as they, transition from other portions of the front, and as they begin to concentrate preparatory to carrying out the counterattack against the Second Tank Army. Again, there's a German Knight's Cross winner, Schneider. You see Panthers, self-propelled artillery pieces here firing. It's a combined arms battle. The Germans are at their peak of proficiency that we'll never really see again after the summer of '44. And again, here's a tank from the Viking Panzer Regiment, troops in a half track. And again, as they comb through and take prisoners, again, these are troops of the Totenkopf division. The fighting was intense. Often there were reports of hand-to-hand combat taking place in the outskirts of Vistula. The soldiers you see here constitute like the last wave of men who were trained under the old standards of the Waffen SS. Very professional, very tough training. Almost all of them were a fellow with a bullet through his mess kit. There's General Gille talking to some of his one of his leaders there. The soldier on the left is the leader of the recon platoon of the 2nd Battalion of the SS-Panzer Regiment 5. This shows the recon battalion from the Totenkopf moving out towards Vistula as they conduct a movement to contact through one of the wide open fields. And again, this gives you an idea what the terrain looked like in this part of Poland. It's summer. Crops are, they're about knee high. There's Schneider again. Crops about knee high, wide open. It's heavily cultivated, but it looks more like Western Europe, more like Germany than it does Russia, because it's more intensively, farmed or cultivated than you would see in the East. So the fighting here looks very similar to what you might see in Normandy in the sense that you have wide open spaces, clusters of towns. There's a pretty good road network at the time. There's Erwin Meyerdreis, the commander of the Panther Battalion of the Totenkopf. This is actually going into Vistula now. You see these tanks, and some of the footage you'll see here is copied by a still photographer who accompanied the motion picture photographer. And you see some of the tanks that were attacked and knocked out by Meyerdreis's tank battalion. You see T-34s aflame, the giant JS-2 Stalin tank that was equipped with a 122 millimeter cannon, a lethal weapon if used properly. But Meyerdreis's men, supported by the recon battalion of the Totenkopf division and one of the grenadier regiments, inflicted a serious defeat on a brigade of the 11th Tank Corps that particular day, and it caused the Soviet attack to pause until they could bring up more infantry to more systematically attack the defending troops of the Totenkopf division. But as you can see, the landscape was carpeted with clouds of black smoke from knocked out tanks. Fields were littered with dead troops from both sides, and the Totenkopf did not get out of this battle without a scratch. They suffered some pretty serious losses as well. But the disadvantage of the German system was shown in that while these guys could not be replaced very quickly or easily, whereas the Red Army could replenish its ranks much more rapidly. And what you saw after the summer of '44, the quality of the German manpower, the replacements themselves, began a decline that was never they were never able to reverse. So
I mean, this was the high watermark, wasn't it? I mean, after this battle, I'm skipping ahead a bit, but the German army in this part of the world never has any more successes of anything like this scale anymore. This is as good as it gets, and it's all downhill from now, isn't it? And in fact, this is against the run of the war, isn't it? I mean, they have been losing in Normandy, they've been losing in Italy. This is against the run of play, really.
Yeah, this was one of the last great offensive victories on the Eastern Front, where smaller German force was able to turn the tables on a much larger opponent, and through skill, leadership, and superior employment of weapons were able to turn the tables. Now, there were some other smaller scale victories that took place, many of which were delaying battles that took place in Hungary in particular, and of course in East Prussia, but nothing reached the magnitude of this particular victory. And again, I believe the last German victory of the war was eliminating a bridgehead in Hungary during February 1945. But that's another story, and I also talk about that in my
yeah, well, we can come back and do that another one. So time is flying. I mean, really enjoying. I'm enjoying it is the wrong word to talk about a major tank battle in which thousands get killed, but I'm enjoying the presentation. So let's come up to the crucial events of the 1st and the 4th of August and what was going on and how these two forces met each other and the various stages.
Right. All right. So using that map there, you'll see that the first step took place on 1 July when you had the Viking division in the east and the 19th Panzer Division, the Hermann Göring division in the west. They conducted a concentric attack or a meeting engage attack towards each other through the town of Okunev. And I'm trying to hold on a second. Let me get to my other map here so I can talk a little bit more because I've got the same maps up right here. Okay. And so you had the Hermann Göring division attacking from the west through Vistula or through Rembertov to Vistula, and they were intending to meet together at Okunev, where they would essentially have cut off all of the 3rd Tank Corps and a portion of the 8th Tank Corps. So that was step one, and that took place fairly rapidly. But just because you've cut them off doesn't mean the 3rd Tank Corps is without a fight or that the rest of the 2nd Tank Army is just going to sit idly by. So then what you saw were two things mainly. You saw the Viking and the Hermann Göring division attempting to hold that neck close of that sack that the 3rd Tank Corps is trapped in. And then you have the Totenkopf and the 73rd Infantry Division, which was in the southwest there. They're holding off against the remaining Soviet units that are trying to fight their way through and relieve the trapped 3rd Tank Corps. Simultaneously, on that same day, you see the 19th Armored or Panzer Division finally arriving at Zegersha, and they're the ones that stopped the forward advance of the 3rd Tank Corps. So those three things more or less happened on the first day. And the second day, you finally see the belated arrival of the 4th Panzer Division, which comes out of the northeast. They had a couple-day delay due to weather and some other problems they had moving out. And they came in, and they were like the death blow. Because not only did they bring about 80 operational tanks of their own, they also brought almost 30 operational Tiger tanks of a heavy tank battalion that was attached to the 4th Panzer Division for this particular operation. So once you had over on the 2nd of July, you had most of the 19th Panzer Division has showed up. The initial spearhead of the 4th had shown, and if you see there where that one arrow crosses the Livek River towards Radzimin, which is in, you'll see where the arrows converge around Radzimin. Yeah. That is a river where Model himself was leading the spearhead along with the commander of the 4th Panzer Division. And they came up to the bridge at the Livek River, and the division commander says, well, my guys say, we can take this bridge tomorrow. Don't worry, we got plenty of time. And Model says, no, I want you to take that bridge now. And he got off the half track and told the company commander who was there on the ground, get yourself over that bridge as quickly as possible and seize a bridgehead on the other side. And they did. And that turned out to be an important small action there because that seized the bridgehead for the 4th Panzer Division, and they were able to get enough of their troops across the Livek River so they could begin their attack in full force on the 3rd of August. And that combined with the full arrival of the 19th Panzer Division put paid to the 3rd Tank Corps. And what you saw on the 3rd and 4th of July is all 4 Panzer Divisions continued to squeeze that sack where the 3rd Tank Corps was trapped. And at the same time, you had the other Tank Corps, the 8th and the 16th Tank Corps were fighting hard to relieve their comrades. And you had the Totenkopf Division withstanding a number of large-scale attacks by 2 Soviet armies to break through the line they were holding. But it climaxed on the 4th of July. 4th of August.
Yeah.
And essentially, whoever was left alive in the 3rd Tank Corps, the only way they got out of there was on foot. And so the next couple of days, the 5th, 6th, and 7th, essentially was mopping up. Model was forced to detach the 19th and Hermann Goering Panzer Divisions to go back down south because Rokossovsky had ordered the 8th Guards Army to launch a diversionary attack at Puławy and Magniuszew to draw off the Germans, so they would weaken their attack force, and it partially succeeded. Both Panzer Divisions, the 19th and the Hermann Goering, were detached and sent back across the Vistula and to the south to hold those bridgeheads. But by 4th of July, the damage had been done, and for the most part, 3rd Tank Corps was destroyed. The 8th Tank Corps took a heavy beating and also suffered a number of tanks destroyed. And the front line essentially stabilized for about a week after this.
And we were saying when we did our chat earlier today that Model was, very much, you said, jumping off a half track. He was actually involved in this battle, kind of personally leading from the front. And you were saying that at one point you kind of had not necessarily believed that those stories were true of him leading from the front, and you kind of found out that he really was. He was there in the thick of it. Yeah,
and the interesting thing is I was able to access the records of the 9th Army and the 2nd Army, German 9th Army and 2nd Armies, and was able to read the war diary entries. And sure enough, it was mentioned in there, and I hadn't believed that until I'd read it with my own eyes, because it is rather unusual for an Army group commander to take part in a small-scale tactical action. But in this particular case, it was the most important action of the entire battle, because when it arrived, the 4th Panzer Division was able to deal the death blow to the 3rd Tank Corps. And what you see here in the picture is one of the tanks of the Viking Division, moving through near the town of Vengrov or Vegrov in Poland. The interesting thing here, these photos were taken by Ernst Baumann, and it's a picture that's going to appear in another RZM book that we're working on right now about the Viking Division during this fighting. But this picture was taken by Ernst Baumann, a very famous German photographer, and there's another one that shows another Panther from the Totenkopf Division taken through the same window. And what this records is the event where both divisions sort of crossed paths with one another, literally, as the Viking Division moved west to get into position for the counterattack, and the Totenkopf Division was moving to the east to get into position around Siedelschutz. So it's a pretty remarkable series of photos that we're able to premiere here for the first time. This is
I can't thank you enough for sharing these photos with us. And I have to say, all while you're talking about, pinching the neck of this pocket and things like that, I can't help but drawing the parallel with what was happening 2 weeks later in Normandy, in that the German army found itself in exactly the same situation. It was trying to put the Russian army in here, being, and it's, it could be the same story, except here the Germans are actually the victors. So it's amazing how quickly things can change in war. And 2 weeks later, like
Normandy, where the Germans were subjected to intense aerial attacks, and they got trapped in a pocket. Here at the Battle of Praga, or the First Battle of Warsaw, as the Germans called it, you have just the opposite. You have a large Soviet force trapped in a pocket, and the Luftwaffe, in addition to the ground troops, the Luftwaffe is also heavily engaged in targeting individual tanks with Stuka attacks, Focke-Wulf 190 attacks. So the Luftwaffe pounded, this tank corps that was trapped in this pocket. So it was a true combined arms type of operation. And again, it may have been one of the last large scale victories, combined arms victories on the Eastern Front. But do you want me to talk a little bit about what impact the Warsaw Uprising had on this, just briefly?
Well, yeah, I mean, we should touch on that so we can connect it with the other shows we've got later in the week. And that's the thing, that when we were setting up these shows, we did a show with Alex and Alina last year on August the 1st about the Warsaw Uprising itself. And of course, it's very well talked about, and some great books and some great films about it. But the point is, actually, this tank and aircraft and artillery and infantry engagement was far overshadowing what was happening in Warsaw. The human tragedy of the city is very different to this engagement here. And sure, explain the two events, how they kind of are running in parallel, and what impact each is having on the other.
Yes, as I mentioned earlier, the Soviet operational objective was to get to the bridges. Was to reach the Vistula and take the bridges over the Narv River at Zagursha, Sarok, and Modlin. That was their goal. They had no foreknowledge of the Warsaw uprising, had no idea that this was about to happen. There had been no coordination or communication between the two sides until after the uprising had already started. So timing is everything. But the only thing that Model worried about when this began was whether or not the Polish insurgents, the Home Army, whether they would seize the bridges over the Vistula at Praga, which was the large suburb on the eastern bank of the Vistula opposite of Warsaw. The insurgents failed to seize the bridges, which was a serious mistake or a serious tragedy, because they could not do that. For a couple of days, the east-west thoroughfare that ran from the major rail yard in Warsaw to the bridges was blocked by insurgents, but through a series of running battles, the Wehrmacht was able to free that east-west thoroughfare that allowed, again, uninterrupted movement of troops. And this was a crucial moment, because had the insurgents seized the bridges at Praga, not only could the Red Army have entered Warsaw if they had felt like it, but if they'd done so, it would have prevented the 19th Panzer Division and the Hermann Goering Division from getting across the river to carry out their part of the counterattack. So in that sense, it played a serious role. But after the bridges were secured and the east-west highway were cleared, Model didn't worry about that anymore. It wasn't his concern. It was a sideshow as far as he cared, because he knew the main threat, the major problem, was the attack by the Second Tank Army, and so he dedicated his efforts to that as a sort of get an idea of how important Model thought the fighting for Warsaw was. That was left to the rear area commander of Army Group Center, who then had to answer to the SS and police, who were actually in charge of suppressing the uprising, as we'll hear over the next couple of days. But there's just one. And people will say, well, Stalin let the Polish resistance die in the vine. It was his intention to let the Germans do that. I don't find that a credible charge, because there's a captured message that was sent by Marshal Rokossovsky to the Stavka, and the German intelligence agency, intercepted the message. It was a radio message. They intercepted it and then decoded it. And what it says, and this I'm quoting verbatim from Rokossovsky, it was so sudden that we were quite at a loss. And at first we thought the Germans might have spread the rumor. That is, the Germans had spread the rumor that Stalin was allowing the uprising to die in the vine. And then it continues. Frankly speaking, the timing of the uprising was just about the worst possible in the circumstances. It was as though its leaders had deliberately chosen a time that would ensure their defeat. So, again, what would have happened had Rokossovsky been aware of this? I don't know. He certainly had an opportunity on the 27th and 28th of July. He could have taken Warsaw with hardly a fight, because at that time there was nothing there that could have stopped him. But to the Germans' amazement, the Second Tank Army blew past Praga and kept going to those bridges across the Narv River. So it was an opportunity that was lost. Had the Polish government in exile coordinated something with the Stavka, with Stalin's general staff, maybe they could have worked together, but as it turned out, they didn't, and it worked to the benefit of the Germans.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of what if scenario thing is always ultimately a bit pointless, because you can't really kind of explain what might have happened had these things happened. But I'm reading between the lines and thinking that honestly, you think it's a bit of a mistake that the Polish Home Army didn't try and make contact with the Soviets and try and liaise and coordinate things a bit better. But whether some of that's a bit of hindsight, I don't know. But it is fascinating that the Warsaw uprising in the end goes the way it does, and it could have gone a different way, and things could have gone differently. But going back to the battle we're talking about, the battle near the Vistula River, I mean, it's pretty quick, for my 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th of August. Yeah, during it, what are we talking about in terms of losses on both sides, in terms of both vehicles and also in personnel?
Yes, as far as armored fighting vehicles, tanks, self-propelled guns, assault guns. Using figures from David Glantz and the project by the Bundesarchiv, their book, their Germany in the Second World War, volume 8. They're pretty consistent as far as the numbers go, and it's calculated that at the beginning of 22nd of July, rather, the Second Tank Army had about 810 tanks and self-propelled guns operational. By 5 August, that is the day after the culmination of the battle, they only had 263 operational. So you figure over the period of less than 2 weeks, the Second Tank Army lost about 547 tanks. Some of these fell out for mechanical reasons. Now the Germans, the German force the Ninth Army controlled the battlefield after the fighting was over, and they counted 302 plus or minus 302 destroyed Soviet armored vehicles on that small battlefield around Okunev, Volomyin, Radzimin, and the other areas that were enclosed by the pocket the Germans had drawn around the Third Tank Corps. So that's pretty heavy losses in only a couple of days. German tank losses were a little less. I calculate again. I can't find firm figures, but it appears that they had 100 fewer vehicles operational than they had when they started. So they had about 257 vehicles operational, and they pretty much ended the battle with slightly less than that. So if you want to go by sheer numbers of tanks destroyed, the Germans roughly destroyed more than twice as many as they lost. And the tanks they lost, they could recover and repair, but the Soviet tanks that were knocked out and left on the battlefield, the Germans had specially equipped platoons whose sole mission was to go to every tank that had been damaged, every Soviet tank, and blow them up. So those were hard kills, irrevocable losses that could not be made up. And shortly afterwards, to give you an idea how bad it was damaged, the Second Tank Army is completely withdrawn from the front lines to be completely reconstituted, because it had another role in another offensive coming up later that year. So now, as far as infantry goes, I mentioned that the left wing of the 1st Belarusian Front went into the battle on 18 July with about 410,000 men. By 5 August, they'd lost 68,668 men. So about 20% of their total number of troops they had available were killed, wounded, missing, or captured during the 2 weeks where most of this fighting unfolded. German losses, again, hard to calculate, but it was roughly around, give or take, if you add the fighting at Sidlcha and Brest-Litovsk and some other, they lost about 100,000 men. So again, Soviet losses very heavy, but they could make those up a lot easier than the Germans could, whereas the losses the Germans suffered, particularly in the Panzer divisions, it's very difficult to replace a trained guy who's combat experience with a new recruit. So while here in this particular battle, it was a lopsided victory, a very hard won and hard fought victory, on the whole, in the correlation of forces, the Germans grew steadily weaker after this point. Now, I might want to mention, the Germans called this the First Battle of Warsaw. There were 2 others. There was another one fought at the end of August that bled into September, and I literally mean bled. And then you had the Third Defensive Battle of Warsaw, which began in October and went throughout most of the month of October. So 3 gigantic battles. The 4th SS-Panzerkorps was in all of them, suffered huge losses. Manpower losses approximated 40%. Most of the replacements were men transferred involuntarily from the Luftwaffe, and it took a little bit of time for them to acclimatize and to get to the point where they could replace the men whose ranks they had filled. So, as far as the war goes, the Germans could only get weaker past this point.
So I was just going to ask you that. I was just thinking, this is a victory, but Model comes out of it, the victor, the Corps come out of it, having destroyed some of this Russian unit. But at the same time, as you just said, it ultimately speeds up their own demise, doesn't it? They've lost a lot. They've lost a lot of vehicles they can't replace. They've lost experienced crews they can't replace. So it's it's going against the tide of the war, isn't it? It's not actually going to achieve anything. It's just speeding up, so the final destruction of the Third Reich. So why do you think? Because clearly you are fascinated by this sector. This whole front is what you live for, almost, for writing. Why do you think it is that so many Western historians are ignoring what's happening in this area in favor of other things? Because to me, it seems absolutely monumental in the grand scheme of things when you look at 1944. Why aren't we talking about this sector enough?
Well, again, I think it's just the innate bias of Western historians to concentrate on what they know best. Their fathers, their grandfathers fought on the Western Front in World War II if they were in Europe, or they fought in Italy, or they fought in North Africa. So that's something they know. They got a direct contact, there's literally a direct contact with living members, or they knew members who had family members who had survived the war. And Western media, again, focuses on that portion of the war for the same thing, especially America, because Americans fought in the West. They didn't fight in the East. And so there's a great deal of footage. There's a lot of American soldiers and airmen and sailors and Marines went into business in the United States after the war, after they were discharged, and so they spread the story. So it's kind of I don't know, I guess you could say it's a cultural phenomenon. Whereas if you look in Eastern Europe, particularly in Poland, this is a very big deal. As a matter of fact, my publisher was approached by a Polish publishing firm who wanted to translate this volume into Polish. So because the interest was great enough to finance that kind of a translation, which isn't cheap. So you have a great deal of fascination in Eastern Europe. In Hungary, it's the same thing. Hungarian historians are fascinated and transfixed by the fighting in Hungary. Obviously, it took place on their front yard. Poland, the same thing. They were even more affected by the war, and their capital city was leveled out of revenge by Hitler. So it's always been big in the East, but I think because of the Cold War, we didn't really get a lot of that. Except what came through propaganda filters, So it's really just now, after, almost 80 years after World War II, where we're finally learning about this phase of the war, and we're able to access archives that up until this point have been, either hidden or lost, or in the case of former Soviet Union, they've got huge amounts of German war records that they've got in a warehouse outside of Moscow that are only now being digitized and posted online, which I found out about, and I mined it as much as I could.
Yeah, and I guess also we have to look at the fact in the 60s, when all the staff rides start coming out from the USA and Sandhurst starts sending their people over from the UK, accessing these battlefields was nigh on impossible at that point. There, it's Soviet bloc. So, they're going to Normandy, they're going to Anzio, perhaps they're going to the North Africa, but you couldn't get here and study this. So that's another reason that it didn't, I guess, get into our kind of consciousness, because we weren't studying it. All those green papers, the Fort Benning Infantry School archive, none of that was touching this front at all. So the US Army wrote its stuff how it did, so did the British Army, and the Eastern Front got largely ignored.
And the records for that fighting are either in German or Russian or Hungarian or Finnish or whatever. And again, it costs money to have these things translated. So I feel for them. I know exactly what they're going through, because fortunately I speak German and understand it pretty well. So I was able to do that myself to interpret these records. But if you don't speak German or you don't speak Russian, it's a formidable barrier that prevents a lot of historians from digging into the records, because there's just an unbelievable amount of records that are sitting there, haven't been touched, vital information that, would illuminate a great deal of what took place, and would sort of dispel some of the myths about the fighting that took place on the Eastern Front.
I think before we kind of bring things to an end, I think I want to ask you a bit to set the scene, because we're going to have Alexandra coming on tomorrow and talking about the next stage, because, it does... The second, I mean, you said there's the two more battles for Warsaw, but in general terms, the front does kind of not move for 6 months. So what happened? How did the Red Army come out of this, and how did the surviving units of the Germans come out of this? Why didn't things move so much over the next few months?
Yeah. Now, after this battle, there was about a week where it was fairly quiet. Both sides took time out to lick their wounds and to get ready for the next round, because both sides knew it wasn't over. And Marshal Rokossovsky continued pushing his armies towards Warsaw, towards what was known as the Wet Triangle, which was the confluence in the north, bounded by the Nara River, in the southwest by the Vistula. And as they continued to push the Germans into this funnel, the German front line length shortened. Every step backwards they took, the front line shortened, so they were able to, as they were being pushed back, they were able to achieve a greater troop density per kilometer. So at the beginning, you had maybe 80, 90 men per kilometer, which is ridiculous in our way of thinking. Whereas by the time they pushed the 4th SS-Panzerkorps into the Wet Triangle, they had troop densities of over 200 men per kilometer, which is pretty good. And so the further the Red Army advanced, the weaker they became because of the heavy losses, while at the same time the defenders, they became stronger in terms of combat firepower. So it reached a certain point, so that by the end of October, early November, it was stalemate. And so what happened after these 3 mobile battles of Warsaw, everything had settled into trench warfare reminiscent of the Russian front, of the First World War, I mean. And the Vistula River south of Warsaw, except for bridgeheads at Magnushev and Puławy, the rest of the Vistula was a pretty good substitute for a front line, because the Vistula in many places south of Warsaw is almost a kilometer wide, which is quite an obstacle. You can't swim across it. You need bridgeheads. So it settled into that kind of static positional warfare until the Soviet January 1945 winter offensive kicked off. And when it did, ironically, it happened to the north and it happened to the south. And by the time they had crossed the Vistula north of Warsaw, the Germans chose not to defend it. So Warsaw fell into the hands of the Red Army almost without a shot. And just, again, one of those great what ifs, had they attempted to take Warsaw at the end of July 44, probably the same thing would have happened. But that's a lot of 6 months of bleeding that had to take place before they finally got to that point.
Yeah, and for the purpose of the German units, you carry on. You've got several volumes of your book, and you carry on their history, because the Corps, I believe, it was in action sort of continuously for 9 months. Was they from their formation in July? They were at the sharp end, or they were at the front line for consistently. So as I said earlier, this was their high water mark, wasn't it? But they struggled to then recruit later on. Was there the quality of recruits coming? I guess must have lessened.
Yeah, exactly. That's what happened. Like I mentioned, they had suffered about 40% casualties between the end of July 44 up until the end of November, when things settled down and it went static. So they were able to absorb a number of replacements, so that by the end of December, they were pretty much at full strength manpower-wise, but they did not receive a commensurate resupply of weapons and tanks and things like that. So they were short. They didn't get a single replacement tank after September of 44. Submachine guns, machine guns were shortage. They had only about 50% of the MG-42 machine guns they were authorized, because Hitler had made a conscious decision to shift the bulk of the German, armaments manufacturer production to the Western Front to prepare Army Group B for the Ardennes offensive. So the priority went to the west, not to the east. So you had these divisions that had bled all summer, and not only do they need manpower, they need weapons, because and without having the number of weapons they were authorized and trained to use, they could never be as efficient as they were in July of 44.
Yeah.
This corps, the 3rd SS-Panzerkorps, was transferred to Hungary at the end of December for an even more daunting task, which was the relief of Budapest in the middle of winter at a terrible time. So, and again, that's something I cover in Volume 2. But again, like you say, they were in action continuously. They were not pulled out of line. No opportunity to reconstitute or rebuild. They had to do their rebuilding and training while they were still in front line combat, which is tricky because you have to keep the enemy at bay. At the same time, you want to train all these new Luftwaffe recruits you just got who don't even know what end of a barrel the bullet goes out of. So it was a daunting task, but, and as you'll see when you look at Volume 2, they did a pretty good job, so that when they initiated Operation Conrad in January, which was the relief of Budapest, they did pretty darn well, even though they had less than 50% of the tanks and heavy weapons they were authorized.
Yeah. Well, I'm just checking out the questions we've got. There's a couple of people got some interesting questions. I'll ask it, then we'll kind of go from there. So this is Paul Errington asking this one. Hi, Doug. During your research, did you find any confirmation of 107 kills in a day claimed by the Wiking Panther Battalion on the 7th of July, 44 at, and I can't pronounce that word there,
Masyov. Well, Masyov. Are you pronouncing it in Polish, Galician, Russian, or German? You know, you got four. You can, but that actually took place before the period where I'm writing about. But I did. I've got the war diary of the tank regiment, and I think that number stands. That was another amazing little engagement where you had basically a Soviet tank brigade drove right across the front of a German Panther battalion that was in a defilade position, and it was just like at a shooting range. So as amazing as it sounds, it appears to be true, and I'm going to probably write about that in another book, but so far I haven't seen anything that would dispute that number.
Wow. And then the next question is from Tim Sampson. He just thought about the German archives. He says, Douglas mentioned reading the German unit war diaries. Where are these located? Germany or the US archives? Anyone knows? So where do you get access to the German archive? Is it the Bundesarchive?
Well, interesting question. We captured a number of those at the end of the war in Potsdam. We were able to get in there and scoop up as much as we could get before the Red Army got in there and took them too. They did get there. They scooped up some, but I think we got the lion's share. They were just shoveling these war diaries in the back of trucks and got them out of there in time. So a lot of them are at U.S. National Archives, which unfortunately right now is closed due to COVID. But they were, photographed and microfilmed, and you can buy them. I believe you can still go online and order them through a catalog, and that's another story in itself, how to find them in the catalog. But they've got a fair amount. Now, they've got most of the 9th Army records, which I use. They've got a fair amount of the 2nd Army. The SS-Panzerkorps records were destroyed, some captured. I'm beginning to see them trickle out of Russia, believe it or not. After we photocopied or microfilmed all the original records, we gave them back to the Bundesarchive, and most of those now, the original records, the paper copies of those records, are now in Freiburg, or perhaps they've matriculated to Potsdam. I don't know, because they have a branch office there. So you have those two things, and the rest. And I think there's some in the Imperial War Museum, but I think the lion's share went to us and the Bundesarchive, and probably about the same amount of records were captured by the Red Army near the end of World War II, and during Operation Bagration, when they captured entire corps with all their divisions intact and got all those documents as trophy documents, and those a number of those hundreds of thousands of pages, 4th Army, 2nd Army, a lot of SS records I just found out are in the Russian Army archive outside of Moscow. And seeing enough, I'll put in a plug for them, although I don't owe them anything. There's the consortium called German Documents in Russia, is a consortium between the Bundesarchive and the Russian military archive to reproduce, or that is digitize these copies, and they're available online. Go to germandocsinrussia.org and have fun. You're going to have to learn how to navigate through that in order to find what you're looking for. Just be patient, and I hope you speak German. There's a number of other ones they haven't made available yet that are in the Red Army archive, and those are starting to trickle out as well. So I guess good news is in 5, 10, 15 years, they should all be digitized and available, but it's a long, you have to be patient.
Well, I said, well, these things are getting better all the time, aren't they? In the years I've been studying stuff, the access to stuff is improved all the time, and it's going to get better. So, well,
Yeah.
I think we're going to bring things. I'm just going to remind you, we've got two more shows coming this week. So I'm just going to show you a quick preview for the show we've got tomorrow with Alexander. So I'm afraid that. So that's tomorrow night with the incredible Alex Ritchie. But this has been Douglas Nash tonight, and we've got Alina later on in the week. So, well, I've learned a lot tonight, Douglas. That was really good. So, for those, I think there's some people watching this who really had no idea about this battle and how enormous it was, and how complex it was, and how many units involved, and rattling off hundreds of vehicles here and tens of thousands of men there. It's extraordinary stuff, and I think we've all learned a lot tonight. So thank you very much for joining us, Douglas. You can come back on in the future, and we'll tackle another one of the battles you've written about, because clearly you know your onions. And have you enjoyed it? Was it good?
Thank you very much. It was my pleasure.
No, so good. So again, folks, don't forget, we've got Alex Ritchie coming on tomorrow, then we've got Alina coming on Friday, and then we've got more things coming up this month. But it remains me to say thank you, everybody, for watching, and thank you, Douglas, for presenting the information to us there. And I'll just put it on me to say goodbye. And that's it. Thank you for watching World War II TV. Don't forget to check us out on Patreon. If you would consider becoming a patron to help fund these programs, that would be fantastic. Check out the book links below. Douglas books are available via the bookstore that we have below in the description. There are other places to buy books, of course, as well. If you've got any questions for us, we're both on Twitter. I'm on Facebook. Please follow up with that if you'd like to. But I've enjoyed it. So I'll put on Douglas again to say goodbye. So thanks very much for watching, everybody. We'll see you all again. This is Paul Woodhouse and Douglas Nash for World War II TV saying enjoy your evening, enjoy your afternoon. I'm ending the stream. Thanks, everybody. Good night.
Good night.